Tonight on Primetime Politics, a new day for Syria. People are taking to the streets to celebrate the end of Bashar al-Assad's regime, but the rebel group replacing Assad are viewed as terrorists by both Canada and the United States. So is the world really more secure? Coming up, we will speak with former Canadian ambassador to Israel, Jon Allen. Also,
all groceries, as of Saturday, will have no GST.
As politicians in Ottawa tout the GST holiday, new polling says Canadians are not impressed by the tax break, at least not yet. Pollster David Coletto will explain. And we'll examine the impact Donald Trump's involvement will have on Ukraine's fight to push back against Russian aggression. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. We begin tonight in Syria, where after 13 years of civil war, a new era has begun. On Sunday, people in the country's capital, Damascus, flooded the streets, celebrating not only the end of the Assad regime, but also the end of a war that claimed an estimated 300,000 lives and displaced millions of people from the country, people who moved to other countries as refugees. The Assad rule spanned more than 50 years, but the end came when Bashar al-Assad, the son, ran out of foreign support this past week. Long bolstered by Russia and Iran, both countries are now mired in their own conflicts, and when Assad called for help to push back Syrian rebels, none came. But what happens next is far from certain, and to talk about this, we're now joined by Jon Allen. From 2006 to 2010, he served as Canada's ambassador to Israel, currently a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. Jon, always appreciate the conversation. Thank you for joining us this evening.
My pleasure, Michael.
So let's begin with the rebel group that has now taken over, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, also known as HTS. It has past ties with al-Qaeda and ISIS, as does its leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani. You know, the Assad regime had ties with global disruptors like Russia and Iran, but will the man and the regime that succeeds Assad be better for global security, or perhaps even worse?
Michael, we don't really know. That is one. There are many, many questions that are up in the air about the future of Syria, about its relations with Iran and Russia, of course. But for the leader of HTS, who was in an American jail for 5 years, who was part of a ruthless al-Qaeda group, and who now leads a revolutionary group that, as we know, has essentially taken over not all, but many parts of Syria. He claims that he is embracing pluralism, that he has moved away from terrorism, that he will not be going after the Christians or the Alawites. And we're just going to have to wait and see. So far, he has not done that. So far, he has been following what he's promised to do, but it's a bit of a wait and see.
Okay, so he's making claims of pluralism, and as you say, at this point, it's very early on, so we're going to have to wait. But, you know, by the time Assad fled, he controlled just, to my understanding, a handful of Syrian states. Is there anything that we can extrapolate about how HTS operated in the, I guess, non-Assad states that might tell us something about the future of Syria and how it will be governed?
Well, you're right that at the time that Assad fled, he had only controlled 3 of 14 provinces, but Golani did not control all the other provinces. The Kurds had some, other rebels had others. I think we can say that in the last while, he has definitely moderated. There's no question that many, many Syrians are happy that he has removed Assad. But I think many of the minority groups and the Shias, as I said, the Alawites, the Christians, are still waiting and seeing about how he will govern. The problem, of course, is that there is no rule of law, there is no press, there are really no institutions, and we're going to have to wait to see whether he can build up those democratic institutions, if that's what he wants to do, and then we'll see whether he allows the minorities to play a part in a new Syria.
Mm-hmm. So that said, how should Western countries, and I include Canada in this, how should we be approaching this new regime in Syria then?
Well, ironically, there's still, I think, a $10 million reward out for Golani's head in America. He is still, his group and he are still considered terrorists. So the Western world is going to have to decide how to deal with them, no question about it. But if he does become he's the de facto leader, if he becomes the de jure leader of Syria, then they're going to have to make some decisions about whether they trust him, and they're going to have to get a handle on how he's managing the situation there.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of eyes right now on Jalani as we wait to see what happens, because this has taken place in such quick succession, the fall of the Assad regime after 13 years of a civil war. But you know, Assad lost ground, John. I don't have to tell you this because Russia did not step up, but also Iran did not step up. And I want to focus a little bit on Iran now, being a regional player and quite disruptive to the region. Does the fact that Iran was not able to answer Assad's call tell us something about the state of Iran right now and the impact that we'll have in the Middle East?
Absolutely. The fact that Israel was able to deal a very serious blow to Hamas, one of Iran's proxies, and decimate the leadership of Hezbollah, who not only operated in Lebanon, but operated very much in Syria as well. And the fact that Israel has actually weakened Iran itself with its last set of missile attacks in response to Iran's against Tel Aviv, there's no question that that this signals a significant weakening of Iran's position, certainly for now. No question about it. Also, Russia preoccupied with Ukraine, despite the fact that they have a naval base and despite the fact there are many Russians who are intermarried with Syrian women. They too decided in the end that they weren't going to be able to save Assad. But yes, Iran is weakened, Hezbollah is weakened. Israel has actually, in what they claim is a defensive mode, taken a part of the Syrian Golan, which was basically under UN monitoring control. And so Israel, a big winner here, Iran, a big loser.
John, as I always say, I appreciate the insight to our conversations. Thank you for the time this evening.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. We now have a date for the fall economic statement. It will be next Monday, December the 16th. That is the second last day possible before the House rises for its winter break. The Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, had promised to release a fall economic statement before the end of the year, after blowing past the usual window in late October and early November. The PBO has new numbers out on the cost of the upcoming GST holiday. The budget watchdog estimates the measure will reduce federal revenues by $1.5 billion. But Yves Giroux also says the number could increase by another $1.3 billion if provincial governments that use the HST system ask for compensation for lost revenues.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Julian.
Ms. Matheson.
Ms. Matheson.
Meanwhile, in Ottawa, MPs
Ms.
voted today
McPherson.
on an NDP motion to make the GST cut permanent by taxing what the party calls excess corporate profits to pay for it. The motion also tried to expand who can receive the government's proposed $250 rebate checks, but Liberals, Conservatives, and the Bloc Québécois all voted against the NDP motion. And the Prime Minister is responding to criticism from retailers about the GST holiday today. Speaking before the Chamber of Commerce in Halifax, Justin Trudeau suggests retailers consult the Canada Revenue Agency if they have issues applying the GST break to store items.
Now, retailers, I know, will have to recode some of these initiatives, and that's can be a bit of a hassle depending on the level of size and of IT systems that you have. CRA has extensive help support and lines and information that can help people through that.
Business owners have complained the GST holiday will be costly and time-consuming, and they say there is confusion about which items will be eligible. And finally, the Liberal government survived yet another non-confidence vote today. The motion brought forward by Conservatives cited critical comments made by the NDP leader about the Trudeau government. But Jagmeet Singh and his party did not support the motion, Singh saying last week he will not play Pierre Poilievre's games. The Bloc Québécois did vote with Conservatives, but not enough for the opposition motion to pass. Well, let's get back to the debate around the GST. As we just noted, the NDP motion to make the GST holiday permanent failed in Parliament today, so Canadians will only get a 2-month temporary break from the federal sales tax that begins on Saturday. But if the Trudeau Liberals were hoping to get a bump from that measure, it's not showing in the polls. You're looking at the latest voting intentions released by Abacus Data over the weekend. And Conservatives, as you can see, still enjoying a double-digit lead ahead of the Liberals. Well, let's talk about these latest numbers and bring into the program right now David Coletto. You see him right there, founder and CEO of Abacus Data. David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Good to see you.
Nice seeing you too. So listen, when I look at these numbers, not a lot of movement in the national numbers that you released over the weekend. So what does that tell us about the GST holiday brought in by the Liberals, fought for by the NDP? Does that mean to say that when you look at these numbers not moving, that Canadians are just not impressed by the policy?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is they haven't yet experienced it, so let's wait to see what happens when they do get that break, when they buy a number of new products that they wouldn't have had otherwise. But I think more likely is, yeah, they're not really, reacting positively to it. Not because they don't believe they need a break or that they won't welcome it, but because it's not going to change their fundamental views of the government and of the Prime Minister, which, for the last year now have signaled to us enough people are typically unhappy, and the result is a big Conservative lead in the polls that we see.
Yeah, so not the big idea that might change stalled numbers, as you say, which we'll get to in a moment. But what I also found interesting when I was going through these polling numbers was that where there has been movement, it has to do with Donald Trump, in that there are more Canadians that you spoke to who seem to have a more favorable impression of the once and now incoming president than there were before, and that's even after his tariff threat. What's happening there?
It kind of confounding, right? Like, I agree with you. It's like he threatens to put a 25% tariff on our country that would greatly disrupt the economy and people's lives. And yet more Canadians today say they have a positive view of him than they did a few weeks ago. Now, he's still deeply unpopular. So let's be very clear that Donald Trump, would not win an election in Canada. But that slight rise in that green chart shows that, it had been flat for a long time, and that he's been in the news a lot. You had the Prime Minister go and visit him down at Mar-a-Lago, and the result is a slightly higher favorable. Just one other thing on this, like, more Canadians have a positive view of Donald Trump than they do of Justin Trudeau. And so that is the dynamic now that the Prime Minister finds himself in. And, Donald Trump's not going to be a popular figure in Canada, but he's not as unpopular as he used to be, which I think is an interesting dynamic.
Okay, not as unpopular as he used to be, more popular than the Prime Minister. So talk to us about the impact that you think Donald Trump may actually have on political parties on this side of the border then.
Well, I think the big question is that a lot of Canadians are increasingly asking is who's best to handle this, right? And right now the Prime Minister and the current government are trying to deal with it, and they will have to in those first few weeks, months. We'll see when the next election comes of that Trump administration. But what we've noticed in our tracking is more Canadians today than even a few weeks ago said that Donald Trump was one of the biggest issues facing the country. Now, that's still only 1 in 5 Canadians, so it's nowhere near the same level as housing or healthcare or the cost of living. But to me, that's something we need to watch, because if that number starts to rise, it's one of the issues the Liberals actually do better on than anything else. And so if that becomes the prevailing ballot box question, it could mean that the Liberals have something they can talk to Canadians about that isn't related to the microeconomic concerns that they have. But even then, it's got to rise quite high. So Donald Trump, like a lot of other things, is disrupting Canadian politics. But so far, it hasn't changed anything about how people are feeling about the choices today.
Okay, you talk about people feeling about choices. Let's talk about favorability ratings and of the party leaders. Talk to us about where things stand right now. As you said, Justin Trudeau polling worse than Donald Trump is right now.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister's really struggled to move his numbers at all. I mean, they haven't changed now for a number of weeks. His net favorables is -38, as you can see on the screen there, far lower than Jagmeet Singh, who's -8, and Pierre Poilievre, who finds himself as one of the only federal leaders. Mr. Blanchet in Quebec has a net favorable in Quebec. To have that position where more Canadians have a positive or negative view. I mean, it's worth saying none of these leaders are deeply popular, but you can see the huge gap between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition that I think has really defined a lot of our politics and how we view these leaders as potential prime ministers, and in the case of the current one, how he's doing in his job today. Yeah,
you mentioned Quebec, which is good because we're running out of time, but I do want to talk about Quebec because it was interesting to note that, you know, traditionally, or has been, I guess, for at least 20, 30 years now, this battle between the Bloc Québécois and the Liberals. But now you look at these numbers, and Conservatives are leading Liberals, both behind the Bloc Québécois, but the Conservatives now leading Liberals in Quebec. What does that mean for the kind of impact it would have when an election comes on the federal parliament?
Well, if these kind of numbers hold, it first means that a lot of Liberals that maybe thought they were safe a few months ago, even on the island of Montreal, may not be. I don't think the Conservatives are going to win a lot of seats in Montreal, but it means like a riding like we saw in the by-election in Montreal could go to the Bloc, or the NDP could be competitive. And so it makes it far less predictable, but it also gives Conservatives some hope that they might be able to even pick up some seats in Quebec. So I think the big takeaway is, you know, a Liberal is now looking increasingly like an endangered species anywhere in the country. There's no one part of the country they can definitely count on. And Quebec, while not riding the blue wave like other parts of the country, might be in some parts of that province looking at the Conservatives with maybe more open mind than they did just a few months ago.
Well, certainly Pierre Poilievre has been very concerted on trying to attract Quebec voters since the Conservative Convention way back when, but really interesting to watch all this. David, thank you for this. Appreciate the numbers and the insight.
Thanks, Michael. Take care.
You too. David Coletto of Abacus Data. To the matter of Ukraine now, as Donald Trump is once again wading into the issue. Over the weekend, Trump taking to his Truth Social account and sharing in part the following, quote, Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now. Likewise, Zelensky in Ukraine would like to make a deal and stop the madness. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin. Donald Trump goes on to say, I know Vladimir well. This is his time to act. Of course, this is not the first time Donald Trump has hinted at what he would pursue vis-a-vis Ukraine once assuming office. In the past, he also talked of ending the Ukraine war in a day. It's a matter I discussed with Andriy Shevchenko at the Halifax International Security Forum. Mr. Shevchenko was Ukraine's ambassador to Canada from 2015 to 2021. He is currently the head of mission for the World Ukrainian Congress in Kyiv. And when we got together, I began our discussion by talking about the missile system Canada delivered to Ukraine 2 years after promising the equipment. Andriy, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with the missile system that Canada has now delivered to Ukraine. It's been 2 years in the making, and I appreciate the fact that Ukraine always expresses gratitude for the weapons and military support that Ottawa offers the country. But are you at all frustrated with the timeline that it took 2 years to deliver the missile system?
Well, in this specific case, we know the complexity of this specific deal, and we know some of the reasons that made it slow. Again, we are very grateful for this happening. We badly need that. But overall, as you can imagine, there is a lot of frustration when important decisions are taken this long, especially when it comes to political decisions, because there are technical things that you cannot move faster. You need 9 months to deliver a baby, you know. But when it comes to a political decision, and all you need is just your will, leadership, courage, and when you don't have it, then it's frustrating. Not in this specific case.
Yeah, not in this specific case, but you talk about political will, and of course there's been a number of different decisions since the war began that have been taken by allied countries. Do you fear that your allies, as much as they wish Ukraine well, do you fear that your allies do not have the sense of urgency that Ukrainians need them to have?
Sometimes, and we understand it's a very complex matter, so I think there is a growing feeling of urgency, but also there is a growing feeling of complexity of decisions. But here is a fact. If you look at the way we fight the war right now, we have the F-16s, we have the Patriots, we have the Leopards, we have all the 155 artillery systems, but most of those systems, it took us months, sometimes years, to convince our friends, our allies, that we badly need them to survive and to win the war. Just think how different this war could have been if we had all the support, all the weapons that we asked for from the very beginning. I think we would live in a very different situation right now. So having said that, we never take anything for granted. We always look for the proper arguments to take them to our allies, to explain why this is important and why this is a common cause and not just the fight that Ukraine is fighting.
Mm-hmm. A common cause, in part because when we look at Russia's war effort, in many ways the sanctions have been imposed on Russia, but because of China's involvement and it's essentially now North Korea's involvement through China, that does complicate the war for Ukraine, does it not?
And we can even continue that line. It's not just the North Korean soldiers that are already in the Ukrainian land, but also we can think about Belarus, we can think about the Red Sea, we can think about the Strait of Taiwan. And when you think of all the events together, I think it's very clear that we see some nations, we see 4 specific nations that coordinate their efforts and they're trying to destabilize the world and they're trying to change the international order. So that's why we should finally acknowledge and appreciate the complexity of this situation. It's not just about Ukraine. I think we should really see this as a complex, very complicated situation, and we should take it very seriously.
Yeah, when you talk about the 4 countries, we're talking about China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Absolutely.
Those being the 4 countries that you say are trying to destabilize the world. So that said then, you know, it does raise another issue for me, and that has to do with the American missile system that has been given to Ukraine, the so-called ATACMS, because not only do you have this missile system, you now as a country have permission from the Biden administration to use this American missile system on targets within Russia. How important is it for Ukraine to not only get weapon supplies, but weapon supplies that do not come with conditions?
I think it's critically important. The way this war is unfolding, you've got to use, you cannot fight this fight with just one hand that you have and the other hand behind your back. And in this specific case, I would say it was a very weird and exotic political decision from the very beginning, just when you give someone a weapon, but you say you just don't use it the way you should. It took us some time to build trust. I think that's important. It's good that finally we have enough trust and enough confidence in our cooperation that allows us to use those weapons. But again, if you're asking about frustration, if you ask me, could we have done better on this? Yes.
Of course, we're now going to deal with the new administration. Come January 20th, Donald Trump will once again become the U.S. president. He's promising to end the Ukraine war day 1. Do you fear that means that your country will be pressured into making territorial concessions?
There is a risk of that, and we should understand that a quick peace would mean bad peace for Ukraine. On the other hand, I think we do believe that with the new administration we can find some good ways how we can move forward. We've dealt with this president in his first term, and we really hope that he might bring some energy into this, some new energy, some new creativity. We need that. No one has a silver bullet how to end this war right now. So we will work with this administration, and we hope this will work well for us.
Do you think it will end in negotiation, or is your hope that he will allow Ukraine to continue to defend itself?
It depends what we mean by negotiation. And you and me, we understand that if we're talking about ceasefire just for the purpose of ceasefire, then it doesn't serve anything good. You just give more time to the Russians to bring more force and more evil on our land. We know that before you go into the negotiation, you should enter with a strong hand. So if you want to see Ukraine and Russia negotiating for a good, proper, sustainable peace, we'd better make sure that Ukraine and the free world goes into this negotiation with full strength, with very strong hand. Then we have a much better chance to get good, sustainable deal. It's not just about ceasefire. It's not just about stopping the shooting. We want sustainable peace. We want to make sure that at least for 20, 30, 40 years, our part of the world, the whole world, can live in peace. We need to make sure that we strip Russia of its attack capabilities. That's our major goal.
Now, it's been noted that we've now passed the 1,000-day mark since this phase of the war began, and of course, many people started measuring it much long before that, when Russia moved into Crimea.
From 2014, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what is your message now? Because there are certain quarters in countries like the United States, like Canada, where people are questioning the amount of money and support being given to Ukraine. What do you say to those people?
Well, we want to see this as an investment into peace and security. If you want to see this peace as a safer place, it's good to invest into Ukraine's victory. If you want to see this world democratic, and our part of the world specifically democratic with good governance, then it's a good idea to invest into Ukraine's victory. We are doing this not just for ourselves. I believe, again, because of this interconnectivity of the wars, of the fighting, of the conflicts around the world, that it's not just about us. It's about really solving this global tension. And I think we are very lucky to have this solidarity with the allies, including Canada. It's very genuine solidarity, it's very genuine support. But also we should understand there are plenty of very pragmatic, practical reasons why we should work together. It's not a waste of money. It's not charity. It's a very good, practical, smart investment into security, into a better world tomorrow.
Andriy Shevchenko, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Michael.
Andriy Shevchenko at the Halifax International Security Forum. Well, that is our program for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.